Right, we're live. Okay, hello everyone, welcome to the show. My next guest is going to talk about inequality in South Africa. Should we be concerned? So over to you, Dumo.
Hi, everyone. Hope you guys are having a great evening. I'm going to try and make this presentation as interesting as possible. Don't want it to be like some sort of university lecture. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dumo Denga. I am actually the host of the Man Page Show podcast. It's a libertarian podcast as well. And also, ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, please, if you watch, when the guys watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to Hugo's channel. Put those likes in there, comment on the video as well, and throw your questions in the chat as well. All right, let us begin. So on the first slide, and I'll be talking about inequality. Should we be concerned about it? All right, so let's continue. Okay, so let me just go back into this. And okay, perfect. So why the fuss? So if you look here on your left-hand side, I just want to put my point on the screen. Here it is. So if you look on this slide here, so check here, there's a guy here in the aircraft, business class, sitting, having a great time. And you got someone here who is poor. And this is obviously meant to stoke up some emotional tension. It's made to make you feel like as if, hey, something is wrong here. And this is basically from the Oxfam report, their last year's report. And the name of the report is Even It Up. Time to end extreme inequality. So again, they've created a very nice image here that is designed to get your emotions going. But obviously, the unsuspecting individual will look at this and be like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? And if that's not enough, they gave a little thought experiment over here about Ntabi Singh and Peter. So Ntabi Singh is the poor person who lives in Limpopo. Peter is another person born on the same day, but in Stellenbosch in Cape Town. And now if you look at Ntabi Singh's parents, according to this thought experiment, Ntabi Singh's mother had no formal schooling and her father is unemployed, whereas Peter's parents both completed university education at Stellenbosch University and have well-paid jobs. So again, I mean, yes, this inequality does occur. It's real. But then the question is it moral? Is it something that really that we should try and equalize and fix? Now, that's the thing. And as you can see, of course, I mean, Peter's lifestyle and Ntabi Singh's lifestyle will be different because of the fact that they both sets of parents have different sets of jobs, qualifications, and backgrounds. So again, and then they mentioned that Ntabi Singh and Peter's life chances are different. And then, Ntabi Singh has a high chance of dying and Peter not so much. And Peter will get a matric and will get a degree, while Ntabi Singh, on the other hand, will struggle to get 1 year in university and so forth. And also, according to this thought experiment, such basics as clean toilets, clean water, or decent healthcare will be out of her reach. So again, throwing that fear inside there, trying to make it sound like as if, oh no, something needs to be done about this. Now, if Ntabi Singh has children, there's a very high chance they'll also grow up equally poor. And that's true. That could be true. But again, if you make it easier for people to escape poverty, that won't be the issue. Now, obviously, if you look at this thought experiment, it's really trying to show you like two extremes. Like, it's like, and again, maybe this is not the greatest analogy, but then it's like taking the top students in a class and then you compare it to the person that's doing the worst. And then they say, this is the narrative, something needs to be done to intervene. But obviously in the school situation, would you do something to the top students so that someone at the bottom could actually benefit in some way whatsoever? And if you do something like that, what are the implications? So this is basically the narrative around this. And it doesn't end there as well. What you also find out is when you go into the Oxfam website, they use a lot of buzzwords and headline type statistics that again are meant to kind of enrage people or to make them feel like as if there's some sort of bad thing happening in the world. That's not to say that there isn't bad things happening, but I don't think these are one of them. So, there's one where they say the world's richest 1% have more than twice as much twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people. Now, again, if you look at that, this 1% and the 99%, these are just abstract categories that have no human relations. So if you look at Thomas Sowell, he was saying that if you look at the 1%, if I sell my house, And let's say I live in Sandton, for example, and I sell my house for like 2 million rand. I'm in the 1%. But that money will go, almost all that money will go away when I buy another house. So, but then again, according to the stats, I'm the 1%. And what you find out, people move in and out of that 1%. So, for example, if I become a Bitcoin billionaire because I decided to sell my Bitcoin stock and so whatever, and then I make a lot of money for that particular year, they'll say, well, Dumo was the 1%. But then for the next 10 years, I'm not even in the 1% any longer because, hell, look, I made a lot of money. I don't know what more do I need to do. And if you look here again on the right hand side, it's almost half of humanity is living on less than $5.5 a day. Okay, now this maybe is a bit more relevant because poverty, in my opinion, is the more I would say I'd rank it higher. It's the more pressing issue. But I mean, again, when you look at these statistics, when they talk about how much people earn in a day, you'll find that people like myself, like libertarians, we tend to use the $1 a day threshold. But then people who try to make it look like as if capitalism has not worked, they try to push that threshold even higher. Some even going as far as $8 a day. And of course, as I've heard many times before, you can always make it look like as if a policy has failed by making the standards very high. You can also make it look like a policy is successful by making the standards very low. So just be careful when you look at these $1 a day, $5 a day stats. But, it's still good to see that if you measure extreme poverty on $1 a day, that number has been going down for quite a long period of time. So that's a good thing. All right. So another one that they use is that only 4 cents in every dollar of tax revenue comes from taxes on wealth. Again, this is another thing that they like to push is that, the rich people are there running around with their money, doing whatever they want. And guess what? We need to tax them. And they even say that the wealth is under tax. Now, there's no such thing as being under taxed. I mean, what is being taxed optimally? When someone taxes you or the moment you implement taxes, the incentive to work kind of decreases, especially if you compare it to how much you're earning, how much you're being taxed, and the cost of living as well. So, I mean, those three things play a massive role. So again, this is another thing. Like they try to make it sound like as if, there's this objective wealth limit or that should not be breached. And there's this objective tax amounts that also should be followed as well, but none exists. It's just that, again, they're just trying to get more and more money. But again, if you look at the Laffer curve also shows that if you try to tax people too much, your tax revenues decrease. And I think South Africa has gone beyond that threshold. All right. Every day, 10,000 people die because they lack access to affordable healthcare. Okay, now this is a tricky one. Because there are people who can afford to buy medical aid, but they don't buy it. They take their chances. Now, I'm not the type of guy to say, hey, buy medical aid or force people to buy it. If people don't want to buy it, no problem. But again, if you look at that statistic, it's an overall snapshot. So fine, you can collect data on people that die because they have lack of access to affordable healthcare. But the data doesn't tell you if the person willfully decided not to get healthcare. So, for example, I mean, if you look at car insurance, for example, I knew someone who actually bought a car and decided not to get car insurance, and he had a car accident, and look what happened. And he had to pay the bank their money and so forth, and that's the risk that they take. So again, I can also take that and say so many people in a year get into car accidents and they don't have car insurance. And this is not a good thing. And I can also push a narrative like that. So again, this is another thing that they like to push as well, is that from a perspective of healthcare, this is obviously meant to try and get people to think that the government should intervene in like putting some, single payer healthcare in place. All right. Okay. I think I've already covered this one. Sorry. All right. So I'm just go here. Okay. Now, all right. Sorry, my apologies. So it says here that men own 50% of the world's wealth. than women, and the 22 richest men have more wealth than all the women in Africa. So again, this is almost similar to the gender pay gap problem that's prevalent in media today. And again, right, if you look at all the people that are wealthy, the again, the top 50% and so forth, not all of them are doing the same thing. They got their money from other industries and doing certain things. So again, it's not taking that into consideration, just like the gender pay gap when it looks at the earnings of men and women. It doesn't take into consideration that there are jobs that women take more often than men. Even if you look at, let's say, our employment statistics, you find that women tend to dominate in social services while men actually dominate in manufacturing. Now, again, this is not to say that discrimination does not exist. It does exist, but the question of whether if it plays a role in disparities is another question that needs to be answered through deep analysis. We can't just assume that because there is a disparity, it therefore means that there is discrimination. And even if you can find, let's say, a situation where there are discriminative laws and also at the same time disparities, right. You also have to show how that discrimination actually affects the disparities. Now, Walter Williams did a study in South Africa. He wrote a book in 1989 called South Africa's War on Capitalism. And he found out that even though in the apartheid system, they had laws that were reserved for whites, they found that they were putting a lot of black people in there because black people offered, black people had a cost advantage because they were willing to do the same job for less. So despite there existing those discriminative laws, many black people still got hired, and even up to the point where companies were even willing to take a hit, as in a fine, when they got audited by these people who checked their employment statuses and stuff like that. All right. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what are the assumptions of equality of outcome? So, for those who are clued up on this issue, and you will know that this is the equality of outcomes that people are pushing, or Oxfam and so forth. And for those of you who don't know, this is what it is, equality of outcomes. It's the idea that there has to be parity in almost every sector. Now, if you assess this philosophically, you'll find that there are a lot of problems with this assessment of the world. Now, what they particularly believe is that disparities are morally wrong and need to be addressed, that there should be parity and it should be achieved because it is deemed as fair, and wealth needs to be redistributed so that more people can enjoy more opportunities. All right. Now, when you look at the consequences, what you'll find is that usually when people in power try to rectify, when I say rectify, I put rectify in inverted commas. When they try to sort the situation out, it usually results in higher taxes, which reduces the incentive to save or to start businesses. Also leads to unequal treatment of people so that parity can be achieved. And this is a point that Hayek made quite a lot in his time, where he said that if you want to get this equality of outcomes, you're going to have to treat people unequally. And also that means more governments in our lives, which means less freedom, such as single-payer healthcare and single education system, etc. So what you'll find is that whenever there are situations like, they'll say people who have money can go to the hospital, a private hospital, and they'll get treated, while there's a person outside there on the street who's also sick, he needs assistance, and he can't get anything. Therefore, the government must get involved and nationalize everything so that people can have equal access. But what you find out, if you look in Canada, for example, you find out that the waiting lines are incredibly long because of their single-payer healthcare system. Some people have to wait 45 weeks in order for them to get treatment from a specialist. So I don't know if you guys are actually aware of this. There's a lady by the name of Lauren Chen. She's a conservative commentator, and she lives in Canada. And guess what? Her father has liver cancer, and she tried to get treatment in Canada, and she found it very difficult. And now she's actually getting treatment in the United States. She actually started a GoFundMe page, and people donated to it. And I think she needed $90,000. I think she reached the target. I'm not sure, but the last time I checked, she was well on her way to reaching that target. So it just shows really how inefficient these systems are. all in the name of achieving equal access. And then you get these single education systems, where again they want to abolish private schools and so forth. And again, if you look at many of these public institutions or public schools, they have to teach a government set curriculum, and you'll find that curriculum is just used so that these students can come out and become reliable voters. All right. So now, what are the fallacies? Okay, so the first fallacy is that there's no such thing as a fair distribution of wealth. So what you find is that a lot of these people who try to push for the equality of outcome, they don't understand the idea that there's no such thing as fair distribution. I think when it comes to being fair, there's fair treatment of people, but how it ends up, you can't say it's fair or unfair. You may look at it and think, oh, okay, this guy got a tough break. He really had a tough break, but he really tried hard and so forth. Doesn't necessarily mean that the situation is unfair. We may perceive it as unfair, but is it actually unfair? So, for example, a good example is football. You'll see in soccer games, and I don't know if you guys watch soccer, you'll find that there'll be a team that plays really well. They take a lot of shots on target. They're dominating, but then they lose the game. Because football's all about taking your opportunities. It's not about how many shots you get on target. But for someone watching the game, watching the event, they probably feel that the team that took more shots should be ahead, because intuitively it just seems that's the right thing, but it's not necessarily the case. So, and what I've also seen is that this idea of fair distribution is also a social vision that has been placed on specific outcomes. And it's almost like playing God. You say, oh, no, this guy deserves it, that guy doesn't deserve it. But I've realized that when you try to play God, you end up becoming a devil. So that's also another problem that comes as a result. And it's fallacious because of the fact that that it's just a social vision at the end of the day. And also, wealth is not fixed. Wealth is created. Everybody's born poor. The question is, how do people actually obtain wealth over time? So when people die, they've obtained some wealth. But when they're born, they have nothing. And also at the same time, you realize that when it comes to inequality is more common than we think. All right. You'll find that all of us here in this room, again, we all have different talents, we all have different abilities and so forth. And therefore, we'll do better in other areas than most, or than others, or we might do worse than others. That's the reality. Also, at the same time, look, all of us are not in the same location. So some, like Hugo, for example, is in France. So he may be exposed to other opportunities that I'm not exposed to people that I'm not exposed to. So at the same time, we don't have equal opportunities, right? So if you look at Thomas Sowell, he summed this up pretty nicely when he wrote the book called Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. And he said something very interesting. He says that I asked the question, what reason was there ever to expect incomes to be even or approximately equal? And that's another question that I think also needs to be asked, because a lot of these people that push for equality of outcomes, they believe that equality is so common, but it's not. In fact, inequality is common. They make it sound like it's easily achievable. All you need to do is give government more power, and there you have it. Now, he continues to say that given the whole groups and nations, races have evolved for thousands of years in radically different geographical environments and acquired very different cultures and so on. For example, why would you expect the people of sub-Saharan Africa to have the same income as the people in Europe? Well, sub-Saharan Africa is by definition below the Sahara Desert, and the Sahara Desert is slightly larger than the 48 states of the United States. You could hardly be walled off from the rest of the world more effectively than by that much sand. When you add to that very few harbors, good harbors in sub-Saharan Africa, it means that for millennia, this whole region was cut off from much of the world. Not totally, and certain parts of it were less cut off. Those were the more progressive parts of Africa. And also another thing about Africa is whenever people talk about Africa and its development, they talk about colonialism and stuff like that, which did play a role. But one thing I also tell people is that Africa, it seems like nature was very harsh to Africa. So Africa has got the longest river in the world, but there are rivers outside of Africa that have more water than the Nile River. That's why if you look at the Chinese, for example, the Chinese created the compass, they had ships, and they used ships, and the waterways were actually effective in creating commerce and delivering goods and services and stuff like that. But in Africa, the problem was that even though we had long rivers, we had a lot of waterfalls, which made the idea of transporting things by water not the best option available. And in those times, in very old times, using waterways is much more efficient. So again, there are natural things that just make it much more difficult. Another example is Iceland. Iceland is a geothermal hotspot, and they're able to use geothermal energy to supply the energy needs. In South Africa, we don't have almost like volcano-like activity, and therefore geothermal energy cannot be used as an option. So therefore, even on a geographical level, there are inequalities. Now, I just want to show you, I also want to play a video by Germinal G. Van. Before I do that, what I just want to do is I just want to make sure that you guys can actually hear. So I'm just going to play this video. If you don't hear it, no problem. I will just explain what happened. But this is what he had to say. Okay, sorry.
I don't think we can hear the volume. Huh?
Okay, cool. No problem. So, okay, I'll just explain the video. So, I don't think I shared my sound. Let me just see if I can share my sound quickly for the sharing options. Just give me 2 seconds quickly. Where's this thing? All right, I'm just going to stop the share, then share again. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry, apologies about that, ladies and gentlemen.
That's cool.
Just let me know if you can hear anything now. If you can't hear anything, then I'll just explain it. All right, let's just go back one. Let's just, all right, no, sorry. Okay, you know what? This is really, okay, sorry guys. Do this. Sorry, let me just stop sharing, sorry.
Just for some reason on Zoom, it's showing my face and not yours. Not showing yours again. Okay.
Okay, is it now? Is it showing mine now?
Yeah, it's showing yours now.
Okay, guys. Apologies for that. I think the sound will work now. I'm not a big Zoom guy, but well, let me just open my presentation quickly. All right, let's just go back one more. All right, I'm gonna play it. It should work now. Let me know if you can hear the sound.
That works.
Perfect. Listen to this.
Like yeah. I know, like they show pictures like of Soweto, or like when they're trying to show income inequality or income disparity in South Africa. There's that famous picture where there's a railroad and you see two different worlds.
Yeah,
one world is completely broken. You see people are broke. It's poverty, and then the other world, it's
lavish.
It's paradise on earth. And there's a railroad separating those two worlds. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you know, the funny thing is that the government is the one who creates the situation, but they're quick to tell us that there's income, that the rich are the ones that are creating income inequality.
No, the reason create income inequality. Here's the thing, and this is one good point you're actually raising here about income inequality. I wrote a paper It's not a paper. It's a column on the Mises Institute. You guys should check it if you guys have if you Google.
I read that. I think I read that article of yours on inequality. Yes.
I'm reviewing it. I'm reviewing it on Monday for a podcast. So.
Yeah. So my article was shared by Senator Rand Paul, a U.S. senator. I was even surprised. So in the article, I said that once again, left-wing people share that elusive narrative that income inequality means things are bad. Since when inequality is a bad thing? No, seriously. All of us on this screen here, right, has a specific talent, right? But each of us is not even equal to himself.
Yeah.
I'm going to take my own example. I'm an expert in political science and economics, but I am not an expert in physics. Although I love physics, I can do physics. You see what I mean? I cannot do biology. I cannot do medicine. So even me, I'm not equal to myself. You see, there is an imbalance.
Yeah.
I am good in politics and economics. I know some law, but when it comes to physics, biology, medicine, I'm down here. And this is for everybody. An individual cannot be equal to himself on every aspect of the spectrum.
Right.
It's impossible. So when people come and tell you, oh, income inequality is bad, there are two forms of income inequality. That's what I talk about in the column. You have normal income you have positive income inequality that happens when the market is the one allocating resources. And in societies where income inequality is a positive income inequality, they thrive. Those who have the article in front of them saw that I talk about South Africa, Namibia, Botswana. 3 countries in Africa that are thriving. And they're the most unequal countries on the continent.
Right.
But income per capita in South Africa is high.
And everyone else on the continent wants to go there.
Yeah, exactly. And because income per capita in South Africa, it's about 6,000, maybe a little more than that. And then I pick countries where income inequality is a negative income inequality. The Central African Republic. Income per capita there is less than $500. You see the difference now.
Yeah, look at that.
And it's a war zone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the government, or should I say the people that work for the government, are extremely rich and the population is poor. There's no rule of law. But in South Africa, it's the opposite. The ordinary citizen can become rich if you give him the tools to build the wealth.
All right. Okay. I hope you guys like that. Okay. So now I'll just be finishing off on one more slide. So what should we focus on? So instead of focusing on inequality, what should us libertarians focus on? Number one, reducing poverty, right? As you saw in the last video, even though South Africa's income inequality is high, the GDP per capita is significant. So as Walter Williams even stated before, he even said that when it comes to poverty, what we need to do, we need to make it easier for people at the bottom of the economic rung to escape poverty, as opposed to looking at the people at the top, expecting them to distribute their wealth. Also, we also need to remove arbitrary barriers that are preventing people from taking opportunities. Okay. Now, one of the problems that we face is that we had apartheid. Apartheid put arbitrary barriers in front of people. So what the government should do is focus on removing those barriers, right? Also, the minimum wage. The minimum wage prevents a lot of young people from taking jobs or obtaining work, which prevents them from actually getting on-the-job experience. So we also need to focus on that as well. And Milton Friedman called this like equality of opportunities, but on the surface, it looks like equality of opportunities means same opportunities, but it's not. It just means that the careers are open to the talents, that all the arbitrary barriers are removed, so that if someone has the money or the skill to take an opportunity, he should be allowed to do it. We shouldn't have things like his race, gender, or any aspect of his identity that prevents him from doing so. So those are the two things that I think libertarians should be focusing on. Let's focus on reducing poverty, and let's focus on removing arbitrary barriers that are preventing people from taking opportunities. And yes, we will have an unequal world, but at least the person at the bottom will have a much easier chance to escape poverty. All right, guys, that is my presentation. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Dumo. It was quite an interesting presentation. I must say, I like the hand movements of that guy that was talking.
Yes,
So I'm going to read you the comments first. I think this is more of a statement from Leon, but he said, paradoxically, equality is defined by the left as in crude and irrelevant materialistic terms. So in materialistic terms, we have the same amount of money. The real equality is quality of life, matter. So it's access to healthcare, it's access to tech, it's access to age, not access to aging, looks, endowments, IQ, he wrote a few importance. So what do you think about that? That it's not in terms of materialistic things, but it's rather broad outcomes.
Right. Okay. It's a good point. I haven't seen it like that before. I think what I see personally is that equality is more on the treatment of people, right? That like equality under the law is the one that we should be focused on. Now, when you're talking about access to healthcare, everything like that, interestingly enough, you can actually achieve that with a free market, and if you actually focus on the non-materialistic, if you focus on the non-materialistic outcomes and try to see how you can get more people access to that by treating people unfairly, then you get even more problems. But it seems that if you don't care about it at all and you just focus on treating people okay under the law, then more people have access to it. So it appears it doesn't look intuitive, but it seems to work better that way. Yeah.
So equality under the law is obviously important, and I think historically in South Africa that's a very important point. Historically people did not have the same trial, or they had different judges looked at them differently, etc. I've got a question here from Viv, and I think it's a question a lot of black people get, to be honest with you. It's like, what does Ubuntu have to do with equality? And I think it's a bit of an annoying one, because I heard Sikli getting angry before because somebody asked him this. What does Ubuntu have to do with equality? And I guess following from that, I know it's not what she meant. Is Ubuntu communist?
No. Okay. Ubuntu is a common, like, for some odd reason, it doesn't even exist among just Zulus and Xhosas and Pedis and stuff in South Africa. It seems to have a much larger net. So Ubuntu is like, there's a saying which is in Zulu, which is umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, which means that a person is a person through other people. Okay. Now, what that just means is that, look, if there's a guy that's poor, that needs help, go out and help the guy, because he's also a person too. It just has this community awareness. There's a lot of emphasis on community awareness in Ubuntu. But the problem was that, again, if you look at a lot of these French scholars who came and preached socialism to all the Africans, they took advantage of that and misinterpreted that. I mean, George Aite actually makes a good example, showing that if you look at a lot of ancient African societies, they had a particular type of structure where what was the unit was the family, as opposed to the Western tradition where it's the individual. So it's just that what has happened is that because Ubuntu has this community awareness, and the word socialism has some sort of linguistic connection to the word community, people just thought, intuitively, maybe communism or socialism is in line with Ubuntu, and it's not the case. Ubuntu is something totally different.
So yeah, my understanding is just Ubuntu is treating your members community nice and taking care of people around you, right? Something along those lines, and different cultures have different versions of it, and maybe Africans are more aware of it. It's more of an important value. But I want to ask you to add on that point. So this is an annoying conversation I had this week with somebody as well, who was saying that pre-African societies or African culture today has got no concept of private property. They've got no conception of it. Okay, yeah, I saw your face with that when you said that, and it's a common thing among academia to say that what they are implicitly saying is that Africans are too stupid to understand private ownership, but they're not realizing it. They're saying African culture doesn't understand private property, and Western culture does, and therefore you need to have two legal systems, and following from that, we need communal land for Africans. Now, I've heard this argument in various forms. So I first want to put to you, like, do you understand what private property is?
No, I don't actually. It's a new concept. Huh? Now I'm playing. I think for me, any scholar who asks that question does not know African cultures. Okay, then if that's the case, what about Lobola, for example? Lobola if there was no private property, we wouldn't have Lobola. We wouldn't have it. Right. It wouldn't exist, right? Because now you are sitting with two families are sitting together negotiating a price. Okay, now again, I know people may have issues with African cultures viewing women in a particular way and stuff like that, but the point I'm just trying to make is that if there was no private property in Africa, then things like Lobola would not exist. But it does exist, so therefore, private property did exist in pre-colonial Africa.
So the funny thing about this argument is that it is a historical argument that has been used in every society where feudal lords have justified their rules. So if you would go back to Switzerland before they had the reforms in the 13th century, the Swiss landlords said the exact same thing. And then there was a great reformer called Eugen Hubert who said, no, these guys understand private property. You elites don't understand it. It was intentionally the argument used by Hernando de Soto and Baru. And I find it interesting how the tech oligarchies in America at the moment is using it in a particular way. They're saying that houses are too expensive in the inner cities of America, and therefore the millennials don't care about owning property, right? We just want to live as serfs and rent forever, which is complete nonsense if you ask them. So this is the argument which is, I think, the most dangerous that is throughout academia, is that apparently there's people in this planet that does not want to own property. Are you still there? You seem to be lagging. Hello, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So yeah, just to rant on that one. That's the same argument that's been used, and it's been used by the colonial powers in Africa to say, well, we're going to give the chiefs the land, and the Africans cannot own it. So following from that, what do you think about the Ingonyama Trust?
Yeah, man. Look, first of all, I'm not Zulu, right? So I just want to put it out there because I know some people see the Ngonyama Trust as some sort of pride related to a particular culture. So I think, in my opinion, it's I mean, from a libertarian perspective, it's not ideal. That's what I'd say. It's not the best situation. I think more people need access to land, but when I mean access, I'm not talking about renting. I'm talking about like actual title deeds. I remember we had a conversation last week, and I said, listen, if the government was serious about land reform, they just would have made demarcations on the land that they own and said, here, guys, here's some title deeds. Right. So, yeah, the Ngonyama Trust, it's almost like, and even in the battle for this EWC, I think the people who have an interest in the Ngonyama Trust are also not probably be in favor of EWC, because that means that their land will also be taken away. So it's almost like a catch-22. Like in an ideal society, you wouldn't want to have them, but now you got a government that wants to limit private property rights. So, well, you got to root for them. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one, but you know what? They're not perfect. And I'm not saying we should use them instrumentally. I'm not saying they should be a means to an end, but at least then they are like some sort of representation of private property ownership, even though some people may have the opinion that maybe they could do things a bit better.
So I've got a question here from Trevor Watkins, who's asking, well, anyone, I guess he means you, does anyone have a stat on what poor people actually want? Like, do you know if people actually ask poor people what they want as opposed to assuming what they want?
Right. That's actually I think the IRR did something like that. And basically what poor people wanted was just that they just wanted to have a job, have enough money to send their kids to school, and that's it. And watch Mzansi Magic. You know, so I mean, it's that simple. Like, you know, people try to complicate it, but it's really that simple. Like, I mean, you know, when I go to the rural areas, like, I don't see anyone going out and saying, you know, this guy's earning $1 million. Like, we need to take his money. It's like, no, hey guys, you know, it's December. Like, I usually go in December. They'll say, hey, it's December. Are you going to Coffee Bay? Yeah, let's go to Coffee Bay. Let's have a good time. And then, you know, they'll come back and they'll say, Ish, I need to go to work on Monday. See you guys. That's how it is, right? So it's almost like these elites are saying, oh, you know what? Poor people can't speak for themselves. We need to speak for them. It's like, it's the bigotry of low expectations.
Right, I understand. Yeah, that's puts it quite well. They expect them to have low expectations, and therefore, you know, we can assume what they want without actually asking them.
Right.
There's got a question here from Bronwyn. She's asking, the only inequality that I have ever experienced as oppressive as a woman. Oh, this is now woman inequality. That's the whole new genre of victimhood, right? You can choose your victim and victimhood these days. So as a woman, is the inability to stand my own, upon my own talents and be regarded as an equal among peers in achievement, because people insist on giving me a leg up. Do you perceive other genuine, meaningful inequalities that have arisen entirely because of the drive for equality? And I speak from my own experience. So yeah, basically, because there was a campaign for equality, you know, whether it was outcome or inequality, like, did positives come from there? Like,
right. Look, when it comes to women, I think the first thing I'll say is that, of course, there has been discrimination against women in many aspects. And I think over the last 30, 40 years, especially in Western countries, it has become better. Now, I think also at the same time, this is not only women experience this, but even among Black people, right? Check this out. So, you know, remember Ashwin Willemse, when he was complaining live on air about, you know, how people said he was a quota player and everything like that, and then he just stormed right off, right? There's also a perception that with BEE that, you know, Black people need this leg up, and it kind of also undermines their ability as well. So I think for me, you know, it does a disservice to the people that they're trying to assist. I mean, like, if a woman actually goes out there and works incredibly hard, you know, she studies engineering, she becomes a top engineer, and she becomes a CEO of a company, all through hard work and, you know, hard work and grift. And there's a lot of women like that. Then the first thing that they will talk about is their identity. But I'm like, bro, this woman worked hard. Like, guys, like, you know, she's a CEO. Are you saying that she got it because people felt sorry for her? So of course not. I mean, I think. Oh, sorry. You want to say something?
yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna unmute Robert now, because apparently I misrepresented her question, and you know, which is, that's dangerous.
Sorry.
But just after that, just on top of that idea, I've seen quite a few times now where there's a woman in power, or there's a woman that achieves something, and then she has to be the spokesperson of women for everywhere. Right. And you see the same thing with Black people as well worldwide. You see them, like, US elections now is a very good example. Doesn't matter who the political party is. If it's conservatives having a message, they've got a Black guy coming up. It's like blackwashing. The Democrats have got the exact same thing from different point of views. And I get the impression that those people who have achieved those things, they're fed up of this as well, because they're fed up of being only referred to as their identity, as if that's the only, you know, that's the only thing they've achieved in life, as being Black or being a woman, you know.
Right. No,
so I'm going to unmute Bronwyn, and then, just finish your point, and then she can talk.
Yes, Bronwyn.
You actually got there. I thought that you might have misunderstood at first, but Dumo really understood it. But I think it goes even deeper, that there's this fundamental inequality that if I achieve something, they'll go, wow, that's really amazing for a woman. Not, that's really amazing for a human. And you can't erase that. You cannot get that back again. So men will just be recognized as men who achieved something amazing.
Especially white men. It's our privilege.
Yeah, you'll be recognized as humans that achieved something amazing. Women will be recognized only as women that achieve something amazing, not as humans that achieve something amazing. You know, and you can't erase that. And I think that goes deep into all the different forms of inequality that get fought for. That there's this imbalance that you'll never be able to correct because you've now tainted anything that they do ever go on to.
Right. Sorry. Okay. Let me just read that. I just want to add on to that, Bronwyn. I remember I was at the gym the one time, and there was this girl. She was doing leg presses, and she's actually a famous fitness expert. And I was incredibly impressed at how much she was leg pressing. I couldn't believe it. And then this guy, when she got off the leg press machine, this guy's like, "Whoa, that's a lot for a woman." Like, no, you're pushing like a guy. Like, that's crazy, you know? And then she kind of chuckled and smiled. But I mean, I think that comes to physical activity. But then also at the same time, when you look at, let's say, for example, mind work, for example, I think mind work is actually where we shouldn't even try to say that's good for a woman. I mean, you know, it's just a matter of applying your mind. And I think that's where, especially if you look in the workplace as well, that competitive, that competition, and also mind jobs as well. I don't think we should even go as far as saying that, oh, this is good for a woman. Like, no, she's in a position, she's competing, using her ability to get to the highest position and provide the most to the company. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. Thanks, Bron.
All right, cool. So I've got a question here from Trevor again. See, thanks to very big, I don't know if it's a question or a statement because there's no question mark. You guys need to know a question's got a question mark and a question with the beginning. Anyways, he says, thanks to some big studies such as the World Bank's Voices of the Poor, which involves 60,000 people in 60 countries, we have a pretty good idea. There's a long list, but near the top in most countries is a desire for a job, better connections to the rest of the world, a reduced threat of violence, and the end to irregular daily humiliations and disrespect that are often the reality for poor people. Now, I don't think there's much to comment on that, but I think he's correct. You know, poor people want what everyone else wants. So I'm going on to the other question. I say from AK, thanks Dumo for good talk. Regarding our beloved continent, Africa, what do you think of this quote apparently attributed to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf? Africa is not poor, it is poorly managed.
Yeah, I think, yeah, when you say poorly managed, I would agree with that. Look, I mean, if you look at the DRC, for example, they got good resources there, natural resources, mineral wealth. But again, it's like one of the poorest countries within Africa. And George Aiti spoke a lot about how Africa was mismanaged, especially with the idea of socialism, the idea of the state running the means of production, which led to politicians getting a lot of power and using that power to obtain wealth. I mean, if you look at the richest woman in Africa is someone related to a politician. And I was just like,
Dos Santos from Angola.
Yeah, that's the one, exactly. And I was
so
just
don't
like,
you think you're discriminating because she's a self-made woman?
I mean, we don't even have to even go to Angola. I mean, there's a lot of wealthy people. And there's a joke that I use where we say that people that are politically connected that get a lot of these government contracts, we refer to them as cadres, but when we spell them, we spell the word as Kheyda, which is an Nguni version of the word cadre. So
yeah,
and that's the thing. It's quite common, and I think that what has happened is that if you allow the state to control the means of production, the incentive that you're bringing up is that for someone to become wealthy, they need to be connected to the state in some way or the ruling party in some way. Even Zuma went as far as saying that if you want to grow your business, you must join the ANC. Now, of course, that's just going to lead to other negative incentives as well. So I agree with that. Poorly managed, Africa needs more freedom, not more socialism.
So, okay, so let's talk about that. Africa needs more freedom, less socialism. You know, it can become a very good catchphrase. But what practically can be done? Because, you know, I always ask myself, okay, it's very good for us to talk about ideology and ideas and things. We've got South Africa, right? It is an unequal society. It's one of the most unequals in the world. We can tell people it doesn't matter, but we know there's political capital. People get elected for saying that you are poor and he's rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what can be done to, at the same time, keep the peace? The other time, just grow the economy, which is our biggest issue. You know, what is the policy solutions, or you know, what should the politicians do? What should we do? You know,
I think this. I mean, if you want to see what could be a practical solution, I think it's going to come through reform. But now the question is, you need to get a lot of buy-in. So you need someone maybe within the ANC, or maybe someone like maybe Herman Mashaba, I don't know, but anyone who's able to convince a lot of people that this is the way to go forward. And then they could use that political capital to their advantage to institute those reforms. So that's the game. That's the rules of the game right now. So if you think about it, I'm not saying that now Ramaphosa must wake up and just say minimum wage is zero. We're selling ESCOM. I mean, yes, I would like for them to do that. That'll be great. That'll be the greatest day ever. But obviously, if we had to be realistic, we have to see how they can achieve that. So I think one or two ways. Number one, there has to be some sort of movement within the ANC that's against this radical economic transformation narrative. That's the first thing. It has to grow. It needs some growth, and it needs to have some sort of influence. Because if you look at the NEC, and guys like Ace Mahashule, and you look at Ramaphosa, who's also committed to the NDR and stuff like that, it's not looking good, right? So it may have to come from outside, but there has to be some sort of fight within the ANC for the soul of it. The SACP is still there, right? And they are the ones that are like kind of pulling the strings. And there has to be someone that has to go to them and say, listen, SACP guys, listen, man, you guys are going to have to compromise at some point. Like the same way Deng did it in China. There has to be someone like that. ANC needs their own Deng, basically.
Right. So my worry with the Deng or the Lee Kuan Yew theory or the Paul Kagame theory has been that, yes, those societies became economically prosperous, but they also became increasingly authoritarian. Okay, I think China was just as authoritarian under Mao as it is today, probably a bit less. But there's also a third way, which is generally called the rainbow nation for lack of a cliche, which is that we can have a democratically free society and a prosperous society at the same time. You don't need to go the authoritarian Pinochet Chile route to make a society, right? You can still have freedom of expression. You can still do it through your democratic institutions. And I think that is the solution that, in South Africa you need to fight for. So yeah, I guess that was more of a statement than a question. And the other question I've got for you is that, okay, your topic is inequality doesn't matter, or it matters less probably than we think, right? You've now shown how geography plays a role, how gender, how ability, how talent, whatever the case might be. So if that's the case, how do you think a society's outcome should be measured? Because if it's not inequality, what is the measurement or the goal, the objective that we should chase after?
Right. So I've seen a lot of people use things like GDP per capita. That's a general indicator of wealth. There's also, life expectancy, educational attainment, but over time, you have to measure these things over time, because I think what has happened is that if you compare like yourself to the next guy, you'll always be disappointed. But if you compare yourself to the past, you will find some sort of happiness. So I think that if society has to be measured, it has to be measured on the standard of living, how that is improved, how people, what do poor, like, again, because I'm a big fan of the free market, I would say, well, what do poor people have access to now that they didn't have back then? I mean, if you look at it now, I mean, you'll find that even in rural communities, people have smartphones, because that market is not regulated. That means they got access to information. That means I've saw the one time, remember that situation where that guy who got kicked out of his shack while he was taking a bath? Look, I mean, he was in an informal settlement and someone had a smartphone and filmed it, right? So I think, I'm not saying to quit him.
I've seen a guy in Mafeking who was on a donkey car with an iPhone, so these things can happen.
Right. So I think we should measure it like that. Like, look, I mean, before poor people couldn't even like make a phone call. Now they can make a phone call. They can even do video call if they have enough data and so forth. And we need to see how we can make that easier for them to achieve. And I think that'll be a good measurement. How were the poor in the past and how they're living right now? Because I mean, even with middle class lifestyles, some have even said that kings of ancient times lived like we live now. I mean, we can actually go on an app and order food and decide what we want to eat. That was something that was only afforded to kings back then. Not the app though, but choosing what to eat. But yeah.
But this was the point you and I spoke about last week on my channel, is that we don't see progress because progress is gradual, right? But compare yourself to 5 years ago, you're probably bad. Compare yourself to 10 years ago, you realize that every South African is better off than compared to 10 years ago. Right. And I think that message is lost. That's the one point I've got on that. The second one is that there's this strange vision of utopianism in South Africa. Right. That it's just not achievable, and we should stop believing in it. I think we should be more realistic. I've got a comment here from a question, actually. Thank you, Peter, for using a question word, and there's no question mark, but it's a start. What about the point about savings? Inequality leads to insufficient aggregate demand, therefore lack of investment and job creation. This is a macro issue. Okay, so what about the point about savings? Is savings a very good indicator? And I guess you would say yes.
Right. But no, I just want to just repeat that again. There's a point that is on inequality reducing aggregate demand.
Yeah, inequality leading to insufficient aggregate demand, therefore lack of investment and job creation. This is a macro issue. So this is a very technical economic issue. It's
right.
above my pay grade.
I would disagree with that. Because the thing about aggregate demand, you see, if there's, like, for example, there's many ways to, increase aggregate demand. There's a lot of ways of doing it. But if the poorest people, if you remove the barriers of entry for them to actually participate in the market, then aggregate demand will increase. Right. Even though it's unequal. So I wouldn't agree with that. Maybe there is another point that he knows that I'm unaware of, but if you just had to understand like how the basics forces work, I wouldn't say that inequality causes that. I would say it's actually the arbitrary barriers, like the minimum wage, which prevent people from going in, getting a job, maybe even discriminative laws and so forth and so forth. So I would say that and then with regards to savings as well, I mean, if these guys can get jobs, they can save, and that helps them increase wealth over time.
Right. So Rob asks a very important question that ties on to my earlier mark of we should not be authoritarian, but he says, can we think of a free market economy that has been achieved after socialism without authoritarianism? So in other words, do you need to force people into a free market?
Yo, that's a good, hey, I don't know. Now we're entering into the realms of possibilities here and not in the realms of what we actually have seen. So I think it is possible. I mean, okay, but now if I say Hong Kong, people say no, but Hong Kong reports China. Then you'll say, what about Chile? But Chile had Pinochet. And then if you say, what about Singapore? Singapore had also have had authoritarianism as well. So some could maybe use South Korea, some could maybe use Taiwan as an example.
Even South Korea was authoritarian, so was Taiwan. So, but somebody answered Hong Kong, Switzerland, and Estonia. Estonia had authoritarianism. I know Switzerland, yeah, but the Swiss make everyone look bad. So it's we should stop comparing ourselves to them because that's a really unequal world. It's Switzerland and the rest.
Right. I think it's also how we define authoritarianism as well. Is authoritarian meaning that we go to the socialists and say, listen, if you guys try to do anything crazy, we're going to get the cops on you. But if you want to get a job, no problem. Is that authoritarian? Now, some would say it is because we're going hard on the socialists. So, and some would look at it and say, nah, it's not. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's how you define it.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, my view has just been having friends from Chile. Pinochet's Chile, despite having a free market economy, was still not a nice place to stay in, especially if you worked at a university, right? He knew how to sort out socialists by giving them free helicopter rides. Right. But it's not something we want to advocate in South Africa.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, this I guess is the challenge for South Africa is to not be authoritarian in the way to search for reform. We can do it democratically, and that's, in my view, the best way to do so. So I don't have any more questions or comments. I'm going to unmute everyone, and then we can ask oral questions if you all want to. Well, actually, raise your hand if you want to ask a question, so I can unmute you. Otherwise, it's getting messy. Okay. So if anyone wants to ask him something orally, raise your hand in Zoom, not like this.
All right. Let me just, okay. Also, this thing about democracy and authoritarianism, I also just like to say that, yeah, I agree with you, Hugo, on that. We have to have a democratic solution. You don't want to be authoritarian, but I think the response why people became authoritarian was because of they've seen what socialism has done. It's almost like if you know the threats and how bad it is, maybe your response to it might be a bit exaggerated. But definitely, we need to have democracy and free markets.
Right. Well, coming on that, I can actually think of Fernando de Soto in Peru. I'm not sure on the details of Peru, but I know that Peru is one of the few countries that destroyed its own homegrown terrorist movement by giving people property rights, title deeds, actually. So that's maybe an exciting one. Does anyone want to ask a question or not? Trevor, yes, I'll unmute you.
This is all very good stuff, but the reality is, if, for example, you wanted to change South Africa without going to a violent revolution, you're going to have to do it politically. And in order to do it politically, you're going to have to promise goodies to the vast majority of people. And one of the best ways of doing that is by promising to give them stuff that the rich people already have. It may be wrong, it may be bad practice, etc., etc. But the reality is, if you wanted to become the government of South Africa, you have to promise poor people the riches of the rich.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. There is political expediency when it comes to becoming a government in South Africa. But at the same time, I think we have to be smart about it. So if you can make those promises, and look, politicians don't live up to promises. I mean, ANC said that education will be free and a lot of things will be free, and they haven't achieved much of it. So yeah, so I think, and I'm not saying we must lie, but I mean, if at that time it means that you're going to say, listen, okay, fine, if you vote for us, we'll give you a free plot of land and we'll make sure that you have a job and everything like that. You can make your promises as vague as possible. And then when you do get into power, then you implement the free market. So when I mean vague, you just say, listen, I'll make it easy for you to get a job. Right. And then, when you get in power, then what you do, you just, you cut off the minimum wage, you go to the labor unions, you try to work something out with them and stuff like that. So it's just about being smart and tactical about it. But I agree with you. Promising free stuff does work.
Well, to an extent, right? We've also seen in South Africa how that can backfire. You promise stuff that you simply cannot deliver, and then people get angry. So I think sometimes if you come in as a realistic politician, say, listen, I'm not going to promise you stuff because the past guys have done it and we simply cannot deliver to you. I'm not sure how that's going to work out if you're going to get elected. So yeah, that's one point on it. The other one is that I do still believe that you can systematically reform. You can move incrementally towards that goal. So you can just get rid of the minimum wage as the most obvious thing blocking many people from entering the labor market. And then slowly but surely nudge it into the right direction. Don't bail SAA out is another example. But I agree with that you cannot just tomorrow transform the system. It's going to be chaotic. You can never do that. And then Rob, you're next on questions. So if you want to comment on that, and then Rob.
Oh no, I agree with that. It has to be incremental. Shock, as you said. I mean, progress is gradual, and that's why sometimes we don't see it. Now, if we make a shock progress, it may not be the best option available. I agree.
Yeah, I'm going to, as usual, be the ugly pessimist in the room. But I think what Trevor Watkins has outlined is quite sound. It's that there's an ingrained political morality, the ideological underpinnings of everyone's understanding of politics and what it should be doing, the role of the state, is that it exists to redistribute resources. And so when people look at privatization, they look at it as a redistribution of resources to the rich. And I personally think that things are going to get much worse before they get better because I think there's an absolute deadlock. I don't believe that there's any part of the South African electorate who are looking to free market solutions. Even if you're looking at now the people who support, I don't know, Action SA or the sort of I think for closer to pragmatic nationalists like the Put South Africa First movement. The problem with them is that they're still talking about free schools and free education and free healthcare. They're still talking about welfare and minimum wage and things like that. I don't see it turning around anytime soon. What I think is that we are likely going to have to face utter collapse before someone says, okay, enough of this shit, we're going to turn the ship around.
Yeah. So my personal view on that is that it is the idea of the system has to burn down before you rebuild it has been tried before in so many countries in so many places that I really wish that you're wrong on that. That it should not collapse and that it actually reforms. I mean, that is a possible scenario, of course. But the point is, if you look at the statistics, as Dumo has cited from the Institute of Race Relations, these things, there is a a sensible middle ground, pragmatist South African population. And those are the guys we can reach. And how exactly, I'm not sure. But I would say that anything that speaks of revolution and Jacobin-like solutions is not a sensible answer. And anyone needs to read the history of France, read the history of Germany, read the history of whatever country that has gone into collapse and tyranny. It's because people had this idea that the system has to burn down before we can build it up again.
Right. And okay, I think Leon.
Rob, you want to ask another question? I don't know. Just see if there's someone else first.
I see Leon's hands up there.
It's Leon's hand up. Okay,
yeah.
I'm going to unmute Leon. You should be unmuted, Leon.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, firstly, thanks, Dumo. Great talk. I think there are two issues for me. Firstly, I'm an optimist, and I draw everybody's attention to a very simple fact. You can look at any single separately published index. Indices of economic freedom, democracy, personal liberty, property rights, human rights, rule of law. All of these indices show the world having improved over the last 10 or 20 years. In other words, by every objective criterion or measurement, things have got better, the world has got freer. But in terms of equality, it's even more dramatic. By every statistic, the world is much, much freer, and that is why the left keep banging on about capital or income, because they want to ignore and overlook every other way of measuring the quality of life. Life expectancy, access to painkillers, medical care, safe water, square meters of housing, access to food. And you know, there's something like 100 indices measuring the way people actually live. All of them show more equality. And then there was that nonsense of Piketty saying that there was greater inequality in the world. And he did that by not making international comparisons. Countries are more equal and have been getting more equal. What he did is he took a few countries and showed that within those countries the allocation of capital. Now, bearing in mind that capital, according to Piketty, means income generating investments. Well, of course the poor don't have any. I mean, you know, probably people in this program don't have any. You don't have to have you don't have to have income earning capital to be wealthy or to be living well. So yes, I'm the ultimate optimist if equality is a value, and I don't particularly care either way. By every objective measurement, the world is more equal than it's ever been. And by every objective measurement, everything is better than it's ever been. I'm with Julian Simon here. Everything's getting better all the time, and I'll bet on it. And when I say I'll bet on it, I mean that. If anyone wants to give me an index or a price or some objective measure that they say will be worse next year, I'll bet against them. You can choose the index. And, you know, it shows what a generous, reasonable person I am.
So you're influenced by Steven Pinker.
I'm Steven Pinker, absolutely. Julian Simon, these people are all absolutely right. That great Cato website on human progress, And yes, so I think what Dumo you've shown us is that even when we use their crude measurement, which is a completely illegitimate measurement, it's quite ironic that the left, who are meant to be soft and caring and non-materialistic, they are obsessed with materialism, with a very narrow version of materialism. They're not interested in where do people have the most housing, where are living standards rising, where have incomes risen, where have life expectancy risen, where have access to nutrition risen. The answer is almost everywhere. So that by every objective measure there is more equality than ever before, and the world is becoming more equal. And you know, I don't know how one gets people on the left to understand this, but one of the things I would say we should do is not allow them to define the battleground, the terms of equality. Even by their own terms they're wrong. But they only appear to be right because they ignore absolutely every objective way of measuring equality, which is 100 indices, 10 or 20 things like economic freedom of the world, Freedom House, all of which show more and more and more freedom, more and more equality, more and more property rights. Things are getting better everywhere all the time for almost everyone.
Leon, can I ask for a clarification? Don't you think then that it is that we are victims of our own success, that because things are getting better we actually think they are much worse, and that this is what's driving the radicalism?
I don't know. I don't really understand it at all, because I go around and you talk of people in shanty towns with mobile phones and that, and this is people I mix with all the time. You sit down, you have a beautiful cup of tea in a tin shack, which is clean and tidy. They've come and spoken at the Free Market Foundation, well dressed, wearing suits, and so on and so forth. So I don't know what it is. I look at the world, and what I see everywhere is more and more and more equality. I see people better dressed. I see people with telecommunications. I see better with people with motorized. When I was young, when I was your age, Hugo, most people in the world did not have access to motorized transport. Our gardener used to walk, and then he considered himself very rich when he got a second-hand bicycle. The only way he could communicate with his relatives in Zambia was for the young kids to write letters for him because we were literate. Now he has, people like him now, have video calls for virtually free all over the planet. There are more cell phones in South Africa than there are people. So I see a different world. I see a world of continual equality.
But you see, Leon, this is what I was trying to get at this. If you look at progress, it's incremental and it's over a long period of time. Compared to 50 years ago, I agree with you. Compared to 10 years ago, we're a lot better. Probably compared to 5 years ago, if you look at the data, because we don't often have data for this stuff, we're probably better. The problem is, and this is what I'm trying to define, is when you talk to the politicians in the political sphere, and when you look at you know, these expropriation and this type of thing, they're relevant to South Africa, it can appear that on a short period of time things can get worse. And you know, what do you say to that? I agree with you. The overall arch of history bends towards justice. I think the evidence for that is absolutely 100% clear. You know, but what do you say?
I ask a very simple question: where are things getting worse? Take me and show me. What we do is we see some people getting better off and wealthier, but I keep saying I want to go and meet the people who are worse off this year than they were last year. Take me there. Show me them. There are some, obviously. For what it's worth, my heart goes out to a very unusual group, the discriminated against minority, which are ugly people. The people I give money to on the street corners literally are people who are ugly. They're the people I feel most compassionate about. No one wants to give them a job, no one gives them a hug, no one is nice to them, whatever. But nonetheless, I keep saying, where are these people who we are told are worse off? People who have less water, who have less toilet facilities, who have fewer square meters of housing, who have less access to motorized transport. I want to know where they are. Please take me there, let me go and meet them. I want to shake their hand and ask them, you know, if they really are worse off than they were last year. Never mind 10 years ago. Last year. 1 year.
Okay. So, but what about then the statistics that say that South Africa's growth is flatlined, and that income inequality is getting worse. Okay, no, we shouldn't care about that. Or there's ones that care that GDP per capita might actually decline, or that the economy might go into recession, or that we have problems with water. There is issues that people are being raised. And I agree with you. I'm also positive about the future, but there are particular issues, and I think those are the ones.
I want to make a last comment here because I don't want to. Dumo's done such a great job. We must get back to him, but I just want to make the point that that's the problem with using income and GDP. If you use every other method of measuring human well-being, access to food, access to painkillers, access to medical procedures, access to square housing, motorized, everything else shows that there is a continual improvement. So GDP, even if it flatlines or contracts, does not mean that people are worse off or more poor by any objective measurement other than GDP, which is a particular econometric way of making a perfectly legitimate thing to measure, but it doesn't tell you how well off people are.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll stop there. I'll invite you to a chat on the show and we can talk about this again in the future.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
okay. Yeah, Dumo, your response, and then I guess I see 3 hands, which is in order. I guess Peter, Rob, Trevor. Okay.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that, Leon. Much appreciated. Just to add on to Leon's point, that picture that I showed at the beginning? You see, what they've done is they've shown a snapshot. Oxfam showed a snapshot of someone being poor. What they haven't done is they didn't measure it over time. So, and I think if someone wants to make a good response to that guy on the bicycle, let's see how he is 10 years from the time that picture was taken. Yeah, but
Great.
Thanks for that.
Okay, Peter, you're next. I'm asking you to
Thanks, Igor. I just want to point out the difference between the micro and macro dimension.
Okay.
And Leon, I just want to ask the question, the points you make are all referred to the micro dimension. The question I had previously on the Piketty thesis that we under consuming because of higher inequality. The rich saves more, the poor spends less. So there's not enough, as inequality gets beyond a certain level, then we don't have enough savings or aggregate demand, then as a result of that, not enough investment. And what we require, and the point you made quite strongly, is we need inclusive growth. We need employment. That is what poor people want. They that is the biggest problem that we face is unemployment. So to get inclusive growth, we have to have sufficient aggregate demand, and inequality reduces aggregate demand, and that undermines investment and therefore job creation and inclusive growth. I think that is but that's a macro point about the problem of inequality.
All right. Yeah. So okay, no, fair point. Yeah. Personally, I think I don't think inequality is the reason why we're getting that less aggregate demand. I think it's because people don't have jobs, and if they don't have a job, they can't make they don't have the opportunity to make a saving. So I think the thing about inequality in that specific context is that it seems like it's presented as if that is the problem. And then you say that, well, and then the impression would be that, well, if you reduce inequality, then more people can get jobs, more people can save. But we don't have to start at inequality. We're like, okay, who's unemployed? Then you're like, okay, yeah, these guys are unemployed. What's preventing them from being employed? And then we look at those barriers. And and again, and if you go back to Leon's point, where he said that if you look at all the metrics, more people are more equal today than ever. So I think we have to look at the practicalities. It's just that the problem is that the inequality as a concept it can be, it can serve as a distraction. But one thing I would say is that definitely, if people are unemployed, they won't have, the aggregate demand will definitely decrease. And definitely, there would be that sort of inequality, but that inequality will be the one where you have someone who can buy and someone who can't, because the one has a job and the other one doesn't. So you don't even have to take the richest person. You can just compare the person who doesn't have a job to someone who has a low-paying job. The person with the low-paying job has more of an advantage because he's got a job and he can participate in the economy. So even on that level, you got some sort of inequality. But then to at least get that person without a job into the market, we just need to look at those barriers that are preventing him from getting inside. So definitely a good point on that. And yeah, but I agree. Like, if you want, what I would say, if you want inclusive growth, just remove the barriers. That's it. You don't have to target specific groups.
If I can just continue on that point, that is an excellent point about the problems of, if you look at the structure or the barriers to entry is also because of unequal inequality. Right. In terms of if you look at small business versus big business. Mm-hmm. So I think that's also that's a source of inequality. I agree that the barriers to entry is a critical issue. And I also don't want to infer that inequality is the only problem. It is just an issue that we have to pay attention to for those reasons. It doesn't mean that we have to be a socialist system, or I think that the time of ideologies are, in any case, we've moved beyond. We now interested in pragmatism, what works. And if we want to make the economy better, and it's not only South Africa is maybe the best an example of a country where inequality is extreme, and it's a problem for the world that we need to address that from a pragmatic point of view. It's not an ideology. Yes, I don't want to repeat myself. I think that is the key point in the current times that we are living in. Yeah.
Right. Quick question with regards to inequality with big business and small business. Now, my question is, now, if we had to address something of this nature, like, how do we go about it? Because it just seems to me that, like, for me, inequality, like for example, there's a Vodacom and then there's a spaza shop. Like, it's unequal, but
that is the, yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting, but if we open up opportunities to small businesses, remove the barriers to entry, and this is where the free market delivers the best. So that's where I'm in agreement, and that's just the point I wanted to make initially, is that the difference between the macro dimension and the micro dimension, and we have to take that into account.
Okay. No, fair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, just to clarify for me, you're saying we need to focus on the micro. Macro, you're in agreement with Leon, the world's getting better and it's rose-colored glasses, but on the micro level, it's not all that great, if I understand you correctly.
No. This is where it becomes very difficult, because the measures that you have to take, I agree to address inequality, because the problem, as or as Piketty defines it, is sort of an underconsumption, the old underconsumption type of theories. it is a macro issue, but there are also at the micro level, I mean, obviously, in a practical way where we can address, yeah, so it gets very tricky and very complicated. But there are two, okay.
Okay, I think also for you, I'll invite you to come back. We can have a detailed discussion of that, if you won't mind in the future. Rob, are you there? Because I see you moved away from your screen. You're there. I'm going to unmute Rob, and he's probably going to say everything we just said is complete nonsense. Let's ask him.
I want to hear this.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to clarify for something I said in my previous question. I would never, under any circumstances, advocate any accelerationist position. I think that trying to make things better in order to clear the ground for a revolution is, I think, morally wrong. You should always be trying to improve situations. How you do that, of course, is a different matter, very difficult to determine. But on the sort of Panglossian view of everything getting better all the time, I beg to differ very, very strongly. I mean, look, life improved for the average Zimbabwean for the first 10, 15-ish years of Mugabe's rule. It did materially, but it was all on the back of extraordinary amounts of debt. And meanwhile, all of the material engines of production and the institutions that maintain the stability of society were being radically eroded. And we see a similar pattern to it, albeit in slow motion, beginning from the sort of second third of the 20th century. Now, the one thing tying all of this together in my book is actually inflation, and what you can see in both the first world and the rest of the world is that there is a consistent decrease in the generation of fixed capital. Everywhere in the world, it's going down. And it's being followed also by the largest period of sustained inflation in world history. And it may not look like much in 5-10 year cycles, but over the long run, what it means is that people can't bloody save. And what investors are doing is they're sticking their money into assets and investments, which is why, first you had stagflation in the 70s, and then they cut the markets loose to invest and apply credit where they wanted to be able to move cash around as they pleased. And when that happened, the mechanisms that they were using to combat the inflation, which the governments were using to ameliorate the expansion in public spending, all of this produces a long-term bubble in asset prices, particularly housing. So housing becomes less affordable for people, so life becomes less secure. You are less sure of whether you're going to have a roof over your head. The amount of time that it took to save up to buy a house and a car in 1965 was a minute fraction of the amount of time it took to achieve the same goal today, everywhere in the world. So these issues, and here's the thing, Thomas Piketty, he comes out with this book that points out inequality, and I think he's absolutely correct, at least in one aspect, and that is that inequality is absolutely coming to be, but he sort of sees it as just sort of something that happens as sort of some vague uncaused phenomenon, but it's the result of an environment in which the economy, because there's chronic inflation, is favoring investors with hard assets. And one of the things that we're seeing now post 2008 is that people have moved their money into developing market. Then you've had the developing market crisis, which has been asymmetrically developing the last decade and a bit. And people are moving their money into land, gold, and other hard commodities. And the land issue, what it's backing is that a lot of the people who are investing in this land, whether it's in South America, Central Asia, wherever, they're actually funding land rights groups in order to disrupt the land rights of people on the ground to make it easier to snap up commodities everywhere. So, I mean, there are organizations that track these things, and you can look them up. The name of the website I have in mind escapes me. But my general point, my general point is that the biggest and most simple thing that we can do to solve all of the problems that we've been mentioning, the difficulty of people to build up personal wealth and assets and reduce inequality, and make sure that there's not a static inequality of wealth that is based on what do you call it, perverse incentives, and to provide people a bit of stability, which is in many ways more important than increasing wealth. That comes from making a currency that is stable and not inflationary. I think that's going to be the first thing that we have to put our eyes on.
Right.
So this coming Saturday, I've got somebody coming to talk about the gold standard, and I think that is, onto that. I don't know, Dumo, do you want to respond to that? And then after it's Trevor, he's been waiting for a while, and then Peter again, and then after that, I think we're going to end the stream because the next stream is in half an hour.
All right, cool. So I'll be quick with my response. Yeah. So of course, I mean, when it comes to the monetary policies that countries have adopted, that has also increased inflation quite a bit. So definitely, so I agree with that. But at the same time, it doesn't. But I think the issue again is that from a philosophical perspective, we shouldn't see inequality as the problem. The problem is not inequality. The problem was that we have a fiat currency system that's causing inflation and making it harder for people to save. That's the issue. It's not. I don't think it's inequality. It just seems to me like equality is just being shoved. Like it's like saying, like, for example, the minimum wage is preventing people from getting a job, and that causes inequality. No. Just focus on the fact that this guy can't get a job. So definitely, I agree with you, Rob. The currency system is causing a lot of problems. All right, that's my response.
Right, Trevor.
Okie doke, thanks. I'd like to think of myself as a realist rather than an optimist. And while I've heard Leon's very optimistic view of the world before, I do dispute it. I think that the world is a bit more like a parson's egg than he would make it out to be. It's good in parts and it's bad in parts. And that I happen to live at sort of ground zero of disastrous South Africa. And if you go to my local street corner and have a look at the number of work seekers standing there, that's growing by the day at the moment. If you go to an Eastern Cape hospital, you will die. If you go to an Eastern Cape school, you will probably come out more stupid than you went in. So things are not really getting much better in the Eastern Cape in most respects, possibly in other parts of the country. But I think it's important to be realistic. In other words, to see these problems and to develop a solution for them. And here I would disagree with Rob. Although the South African situation is dire, I don't think we have to go to a revolution in order to fix it. And I think somewhat fascinatingly, we had the solution suggested yesterday. It's the Frans Cronje's idea of enclaves, which are really just a variation on the canton idea that Leon proposed 25, 30 years, 40 years ago, maybe even. And I think it's fascinating that, here we sit, Leon is still here, and his solution for the country, I think, is still probably the best one.
Right. And if I may just jump in there, and I'll get your response now, Dumo. Trevor, do you think that is achievable, and does it need to be institutionalized through legislation first, or will it just happen spontaneously?
I think it's utterly achievable. I think wonderfully the three northern states in the Baltic, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, I think it is, illustrates what can be done by going to a much smaller route. One is a success, one is a failure, and one is just muddling along. So, the world isn't perfect. But you made a very interesting statement earlier today, which is you can discount Switzerland. It's always outside the box. I think the reality is that we all want to become more like Switzerland. If we needed a model, become more like Switzerland, and the great characteristic of the Swiss model are their cantons.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. I think Dumo, your response to that, and then it's Peter.
All right. I agree with that. I don't think we should go down the revolutionary path. We have to go by a democratic path, and we have to be smart about it. That's the reality. We have to be really smart. I mean, if you listen to Anthea's presentation yesterday, talking about like the tactics that the ANC used, as much as they were evil, in terms of achieving the objective, they were smart. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use a moral solution that is also smart and also effective at the same time. So I agree.
Thanks. Over to you, Peter.
Just to correct the Rob, I mean, we face deflation, not inflation. I mean, we've been through the great moderation from the early 80s, and after the great financial crisis, the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, we've been battling deflation, and we're going to battle deflation even more so in the coming years, very short term. Japan is already back into deflation. So inflation is not the problem at the moment. And well, I just want to make that point. We don't face the danger of inflation. We do face it down the line, maybe 5 years down the line, if we get reckless with helicopter drops and modern monetary theory and all these fancy ideas for just fiscal monetization. Then we will face inflation, but not because so it's not inflation at the moment. That's a problem. Then the point about revolution, I think if we don't address from a macro perspective the inequality issue, then revolution is not so unrealistic for South Africa. There are many very leading commentators that's predicted that we will that we may experience a Arab Spring type of event in South Africa. So it's not. It is important to also consider the inequality issue from a macro perspective.
Okay, thank you for that. I think so thanks for the clarity. As I said, Peter, I will invite you again to the show to give more clarity on economic stuff for us, because you're obviously studying it and working in it. So Dumo, thank you again. I don't know if you want to say something in closure, but I think we've way gone over time, and the next stream is in 20 minutes.
All right. Just want to say thanks for inviting me. Much appreciated. And yeah, guys, thanks to the panel as well. Guys had some great comments and questions, and good stuff.
Okay, thank you very much. And just remember, Dumo's got his own channel, Man Patria, and I recommend everyone